and blow the whole country, oil fields and all, right off the map. But of course, that's just a personal observation. This is Les Nessman saying good day, and may the good news be yours.
Arlene, you look a little sleepy.
She just took an asprin. Come on, Les, get up from there.
Yeah, Arlene, you sit right down here.
What kind of an aspirin?
I don't know, a big pink and blue thing.
Arlene, you all right?
Of course I am.
Of course she is.
How many did she take?
Well, I only saw her take one.
All right, Arlene, now, here are the phones. You remember the phones?
Of course I am.
Good.
All right. Here we go.
Void where prohibited.
WKRP, Cincinnati.
And now, it's time for Ask Arlene, a bold new venture in Cincinnati radio listening where you, the listener, call in to Ask Arlene, poignant personal questions, and receive in return poignant personal expert advice from an expert. Expert. And now, here's Arlene.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Arlene. Welcome to my show.
Listen up, fellow babies. It's time for another episode of Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive, history nerd, WKRP in Cincinnati podcast. I'm Mike Grasso. With me, as always, is Rob McDougall.
Hello, my friends.
And today we're going to focus on the women of WKRP, Jennifer Marlowe and Bailey Quarters, in a pair of episodes titled Ask Jennifer and I Am Woman.
Hear me roar.
The unspoken, second half to that couplet. Ask Jennifer is where we're going to start today. The plot of this one, fairly straightforward. Herb brings a good idea to Andy and the big guy. Let's start an advice radio show. It's happening all over the country and markets everywhere. We need to get a piece of that pie. And after a lengthy and I thought quite humorous montage of interviews, and after a bunch of those interviews, they settle on Arlene Allen. Arlene is an author and an advice columnist and someone with a great radio voice, and so she seems like a shoo-in. But the day of her debut, she comes in a little bit distraught after having to confront her fourth ex-husband.
Eddie.
And very quickly takes an aspirin to handle the stress. The aspirin turns out to be a Valium. And right before she's about to go on the air, she collapses at the desk in the control booth. And Jennifer, who happens to be in the booth, very smoothly and suavely takes over for Arlene and becomes the, how do you say pseudonymous? Pseudonymous?
That's right.
And she becomes the pseudonymous Arlene of Ask Arlene. And Jennifer becomes a big hit. She's a great advice columnist. She gives her advice with a lot of humor and a lot of down-to-earth wisdom. The twist of the episode comes near the end, though, when one of her repeat callers, Joan, confesses to Jennifer that the advice that Jennifer gave her ended up with her being beaten by her husband. And the final 3 to 5 minutes of the episode is about Jennifer dealing with the ramifications of that. This one really, really changes tone, much like In Concert, much like a bunch of other episodes we've looked at. Rob, what did you end up thinking about Ask Jennifer?
Well, like you say, the tone changes. It's like a roller coaster. You could get whiplash from this because it really is for about, 20 minutes of the runtime. It's very much a light, goofy, fun episode. It has that unusual for WKRP, that kind of leaping forward in time, even with title cards telling us that 6 days have passed, 77 days have passed, 168 days have passed. Like a whole year goes by or half a year goes by in this episode. They have a lot of fun with it. It's very light. It's very goofy. When Jennifer becomes Arlene, they have a lot of fun, as they always do, with goofy callers and funny calls that she gets. And then almost out of the blue, I mean, Joan calls in a few times, but tonally out of the blue, Joan is reporting in this shaky voice that, her husband is abusive and has been hitting her. And, it's awful. It's awful. And, they go there for drama, but I feel like they don't give themselves time or space to pull out of that. And so the last few minutes are, when they try and pull out of the tailspin and settle things, it's Mr. Carlson that ends up trying to comfort her, but I didn't feel like it was satisfying or that they stuck the landing there.
Yeah, I think that there's one way we can compare this episode to Young Master Carlson. I know that's a strong tonic to compare it to what we've pretty much
that's a little
considered the worst episode of WKRP, exactly. But I think it's similar in the sense that in Young Master Carlson, we never have a satisfactory resolution to the fact that Little Arthur was racist towards Venus. That's the real issue. We talked about it with Jeff Wickstrom a couple seasons ago. It's not the fact that he was rude or that he was, dumping out Jennifer's purse. What we as modern viewers want to see is a resolution to Little Arthur believing this way and being this way. And with this episode, I think our modern narrative trajectory would be this happens at the midpoint of the episode. We have this revelation that Jennifer accidentally gave advice that, resulted in this horrible thing happening. And then the rest of the episode could be about helping Joan, about getting Joan out of that situation, about making amends for, giving out advice while not being a licensed, therapist on the air, and all of the sort of things that cross Jennifer's mind and eyes as she's considering what happened. Lonnie Anderson does a very good job portraying that dismay, but there's no real satisfactory resolution for Joan. I care about Jennifer, but I care more about Joan in this episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's one line to address that. They say that Bailey has helped her, has put her in touch with some sort of support group or that's going to get her out and get her the help she needs. But they only have time for one line. And really, of course, the focus of the episode is on Jennifer and what this has done to her. And yeah, I also just wonder what the lesson or moral is meant to be here. There's kind of an implied sense that Jennifer has done something wrong by posing as a psychiatrist and giving. She never posed as a psychiatrist. She always but she has
a disclaimer at the beginning of every
that there's
episode,
something problematic about advice shows in general, and this is and that she's sort of learning her lesson. But what I don't see that that she needs to learn a lesson, and the implication that she feels bad that her flip advice has got Joan in this bad situation. It's true that her advice was too flip for the situation, but it's not her flip advice that to say that it's Jennifer's fault that Joan got hit is about 2 steps away from saying it's Joan's fault that she got hit. And, Joan is in a bad marriage with an abusive husband, and that's not Jennifer's fault. So, it's just, once again, I guess our sensitivities, we feel like the comparison to Young Master Carlson is apt in that they have sort of picked up something that is just too heavy or too hot to really resolve in the sort of structure of the 26-minute or the 5 minutes they give it in this episode.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, Arlene has just resigned. Johnny's filling in.
Well, now, wait a minute, Jennifer. You promised me...
With Bailey's help, I just got a caller in touch with a center for battered women.
Well, that's good.
Except she probably wouldn't have gotten battered were it not for my cute flip off-the-cuff advice.
Well, now, wait a minute, Jennifer. You can't take responsibility for something like that.
Why not?
Well, because we talked you into this.
You don't understand, Andy. I kind of liked it. I enjoyed it. Do you think I would have done that day after day if I hadn't? Does that sound like me? So, now I'm going to take my little seat right out here in the lobby and keep my big mouth shut.
Yeah, I agree. Lissa Levin is the writer of this episode. As you mentioned, kind of in the kickoff, the first half of the episode, very snappy, very funny, and very different pacing than we usually see in WKRP. Apart from the time expansion that you were talking about, which is something I do want to return to because it is very interesting. The interview montage I was talking about, you kind of get one interview after the other, and you have a setup, a joke, and a punchline, and then they're out. And then the callers, it's the same exact thing. It reminded me of Syphil and Ollie, calls from the public,
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of got a wacky problem, and Jennifer gives them a little bit of advice, and they go, okay, thanks very much, and then hang up, basically. And yeah, so you're not ready for this curveball that comes in, And even with the foreshadowing, I mean, I think it was also said that Joan's husband was, basically just running around on her and cheating on her.
Right.
And there were lots of, problems before it escalated to this point. It's funny. I want to return a little bit to Jennifer as really good sort of advice giver. I mean, I think one thing that we find out near the end of this episode when it is Jennifer and the big guy is that what Jennifer was doing for the listeners of WKRP was what she was doing for the big guy all along, and that being that emotional center, being an advisor who he can trust.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the big guy wants to make sure she doesn't lose hope, is because we'll talk about it in a little bit, but the way the big guy kind of approaches this is a little problematic on some levels, but I think mostly we're meant to take that conclusion away, is that, Jennifer actually is very good at giving advice.
Exactly.
She is
That's
very
what she
empathetic.
does. Yeah,
Yes.
Andy says that in this episode. He says, who does everyone go to when they need, to have some sense talk to them? And it's true. I don't know if they nailed that in the first season, but by this point, it's well established that the person with the most wisdom a lot of the time is Jennifer. When our moms watched the show, and my mom only watched 2 episodes, and after watching 2 episodes, she described Jennifer as being maternal. We were talking about moms, and she described Jennifer as being maternal to the people in the show. And
Absolutely.
We can get into the whole sexual politics of that.
Yes.
That I think that she is the person people go to, and her advice is sensible and sound and flip, and so at the same time as being flip, so she's qualified to do a radio advice show.
Yeah.
But then what the episode leaves you with the sort of sense that there's something kind of sordid and dark about advice shows in general. Don't you feel that way? That there's something that they sort of like should never have done this. That the fact that it's Herb's idea in the beginning, sort of like that's the cue right away that there's something sleazy about this.
The way Herb kind of puts it to the big guy and Andy is what I said earlier. He says these shows are a great success. They get a lot of listeners, and we can slide it right in between a couple of DJs, and it'll be a huge hit in the mid-afternoon. I mean, again, this is nothing new. I mean, we'll talk about advice columnists and advice radio shows later, but, is it the right choice for even the station to have? I mean, they're not a talk station. They're a music station. It's programming-wise, it seems kind of problematic, and I think that, you're right. It's another one of Herb's get-rich-quick schemes, basically, but it's not expressly lampshaded as such. It's sort of like, it's Herb's idea, and it ends up being a bad idea, like you say, and I wonder if, again, that was intentional. If we can blame Herb for everything in this episode instead of Jennifer. I don't know.
Oh, no, Jennifer. Don't do that.
Why not?
Because you can't just shut yourself off.
Why not?
Because I need you.
I don't want people to need me.
Oh, yes, you do. You want me to need you. And I'll tell you something else, young lady. If you hadn't been on that phone, that woman probably wouldn't have gotten the help that she needed from you and Bailey. And do you really think that a radio show has anything at all to do with a man who batters women?
Would you gentlemen please excuse me, because I think I'm going to cry now, and I don't want anybody to see me do that.
Yeah, of course.
So one sign that this is a bad idea is that it's Herb's idea, and that Jennifer is reluctant all the way along. Jennifer,
she is, yes.
She only steps in because Arlene passes out, does a great head desk right on the air, and immediately says, well, when can I get out of this? And then we have another series of cutting forward to show that in fact it goes days and days and days. I just back on the pacing thing.
Yeah,
this is a lot more like a modern sitcom. The way this sort of is paced with cuts, right? That it doesn't have that sort of stagey whole scene, begin and end scene, accent all the characters. Like, think how many outfits they go through in this episode to show that so much time is passing. They do a joke and they cut, and a joke and they cut, and a joke and they cut. But Jennifer wants out.
From the very first episode, she's like, I just filled in for the pilot. It's kind of like Sylvia Sidney and Carol Bruce. It's like, okay, I was Arlene for one day. You have to find a new Arlene now, That's
right. But then at the end, when she's rightfully shaken up, by what's happened with Joan, she says, I don't want people to need me. I don't want, and then it's, of course, it's Arthur that sort of, well, I don't know if he cheers her up or not, but he tells her how he needs her.
Yeah. I think for him, it's kind of the, let's bug up the troops kind of thing. It's sort of like, well, listen, I think he's saying implicitly, I understand you don't want to do the radio show anymore, but we need you here. Like you're good at it and we need you here. And, again, like somebody like the big guy is going to look at it that way. We've had all kinds of jokes throughout the series about how Jennifer doesn't do typing, dictation, blah, blah, blah. What Arthur is doing here is essentially telling her why he pays her so much money, why he has, made her so vital to the running of the station. It's because she's good at this kind of being the center of everything and giving people the right advice. But the way it comes out of the big guy's mouth sounds a bit, I guess, presumptuous, a little bit sort of like, this is what I expect you to do. He sounds more like a boss than he usually does.
Well, but it's weird, and I find it weird and Oedipal and squicky because he's also clearly asking her to be his mommy. In particular, the problem that he has, and it's a standard, delightful Mr. Carlson problem. It's that his toy trains are broken. So this, the kind of lampshading of the maternal relationship that Jennifer has to the big guy, which often is so sort of cute and fun, and here just
it's a little more pathetic. It's a little bit more. There's this thought I had while watching it, which is that Arthur, maybe it's time for you to get yourself through the day. You know what I mean? Maybe it's time for you to put a little bit of that burden on yourself, because the person that you depend on is dealing with a lot right now. You know what I mean?
Like be some support for her. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's meant to be that he's supporting her, but it's just,
it just doesn't come out that way.
The show, we've said this before, the show really has a hard time getting inside Jennifer's head. She's always the object, right? So even when the scene is supposed to be about how Arthur can cheer her up, he does so by insisting that she be his mommy.
Yeah. Yeah. And this gets into an issue that's, I think in the last couple of years become one that I think has gotten a greater amount of awareness, which is this idea of unpaid emotional labor and the role that women have in Western society in delivering a lot of that unpaid emotional support. And again, the contrast here is, again, that Jennifer is well compensated for the work that she does at WKRP. She is literally paid. What the big guy is saying here essentially is that I am paying you for being this center of the station and of my life, essentially. And that's fine. But I think that the perceived callousness that the big guy comes out with and the way he poses it makes us think in our modern sort of context of this idea of emotional labor that is not compensated.
Yeah.
That's taken for granted.
Yeah. Because so many workplaces, of course, there's the official, measurable, countable work that the workplace produces, the widgets that they make, the students that they teach, the whatever, the sales figures. But anytime you have people working, a large number of people working in an office together, there is a lot of work making sure that people's feelings don't get hurt and smoothing things over between this person and that person, and, bucking up and cheering people up when things are lousy, and sometimes, sugarcoating stuff that actually is lousy, and also sort of like just stuff that's kind of halfway between emotional and work, sort of that it's kind of the office equivalent of doing the dishes and the chores. There's sort of like work that no one gets credit for, but somebody has to do, or else it'll just pile up and flood the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, speaking as someone who used to work in HR and in training and in professional development and in conflict resolution, I mean, these roles, these duties rather, are usually the role of human resources. But if you, I'm not going to have you put anything on tape about your human resources department where you work, but I think the reputation that human resources gets, and I think it's rightfully given that reputation, is that they're usually dealing with a skeleton crew. And they're usually dealing with folks who aren't really equipped to do a lot of this type of stuff because they've been trained to do payroll and benefits and all of the stuff, again, that widget stuff that needs to get done on a daily basis. And so, if you go to human resources to have a conflict resolved, they're going to follow a checklist. And I think we talked about this way, way back when in the second season. Forget which episode, but sometimes when it comes to people's feelings, you can't just kind of check things off on a checklist, There's more instinctive, more emotional intelligence type tasks to be done with something like that. And you're right, that's work that oftentimes in our society gets dumped on women. It's a patriarchal expectation because of these type of maternal associations that emotional labor has.
Yeah. So, I work in a university, and in an academic context, this always comes up because, faculty have, one of the great things about my job is that faculty have a great deal of autonomy in how they spend their time. There really isn't, there are metrics we have to meet. We get evaluated every now and then, but on a day-to-day basis, there is nobody who can say to a tenured faculty member, you should be working on this, you should be working on this, you should show up today. It's sort of like we have a great deal of freedom, but there's still 1,000 little things that have to get done or the department won't run. And so they're kind of done on a voluntary basis. And we divide up our work agreements into research, teaching, and service. And service is this funny grab-all category for all the shit that needs to get done that nobody really wants to do. And so like the dishes or grocery shopping for the shared communal house, they pile up and then get done by the person who, cares more, or just by the person who cracks first. And, I want to say that I do a lot of that shitty work. But when apart from me and a few other people, it really does very often end up being the women doing it.
This expectation extends out of the modern workplace, outside of the modern workplace, and into the home. Because if you are a woman and you work 40 plus hours a week, and you have these implicit expectations, a lot of times you have to go home and deal with the same expectations when you get home, whether it's with close family or friends or anything else. When a lot of the discussions about sort of the extreme men's rights folks was going out during the aftermath of the Elliot Rodgers shooting, there was a lot of talk about men talking to other men and men giving emotional support to other men, because the expectation for women to have to deal with these kind of issues in the aftermath of a disaster like that was so anti-woman was too much. I read a lot of those articles at the time, and I, kind of made this commitment to myself. It's like, don't always go to women for your emotional support. Go to other men. But what patriarchy does is makes us unable to make those kind of emotional connections to men in a lot of cases. And so what ends up happening is that women who are in our lives become the default. They become the default supporters, the default nurturers. And we can't do that anymore. It's just not, it's not fair and it's not right.
Yeah, boy, I hadn't even thought of connecting all of that to, the fact that, of course, the real problem in this episode is the toxic masculinity of Joan's husband.
Of course,
but then
yes.
It's all in the context of, the office and the emotional labor that Jennifer does and doesn't want to do. And you just wish some of the guys would step up and, Andy, Mr. Carlson, Johnny, Venus, that they would put their arm around Jennifer and it's a laugh riot, isn't it?
Well, we shouldn't throw Johnny under the bus, because he does manage to save a very frantic caller at the end of the episode with some excellent Emily Post etiquette style advice for setting up the dinner table.
No, Patricia, you're wrong.
Well, I just don't know what I'm going to do about it.
Right. Wait a second. Would you just listen to me, please?
Oh, all right.
Okay, because you don't want to look like a fool, right?
No.
Right? Okay. So now listen very carefully, because I'm not always going to be here to help you, okay? You always want to start on these things from the outside, and that'll lead you just naturally, organically, into those inner areas, and that's where all the real action is, you dig? Now, what's furthest out is the salad fork and the soup spoon. Then the teaspoon, okay?
Which side?
It's on the right. The big fork is on the inside left, and the dessert spoon is above.
Above what? Why do you have to do
all right, Pat, Patricia. I tell you what, put the napkin over your head and eat with your hands, okay? We got a lot of calls. Let's move on here.
That is a nice little lagniappe that almost gets the bad taste out of my mouth. That I said that the ending didn't work for me, but the very ending stinger of Johnny telling her where the dessert spoons go, good man, Johnny. There's a man useful in a pinch, in a crisis.
It makes me think about Bailey's fantasy about being in the White House. I mean, Johnny probably could have handled, 100-person state dinner if he had to, but. I want to bring that up about sort of finding some laughter amidst a lot of the stress and uncomfortableness, because I think that's going to be a theme of today's podcast, Rob.
Ooh, I think that's going to be a theme of the next
we might want to preview
podcasts.
that a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, Johnny, thank you for giving us a tiny, tiny laugh at the end of the episode. But
yeah, do we want to explain what we mean by that? That we've hinted at this before, but hold my order, listeners. If you don't know, the season 3 of WKRP has its ups and its downs, but I think that we are passing into a stretch here in the back half of season 3 where there are just going to be there's still funny episodes, there's still laughs, there's still good episodes, but on the whole, there is a long stretch coming up of kind of downer episodes, or episodes that we might call very special episodes, a lot of issue episodes, and then a lot of episodes that just have this weird darkness pop up in them. And I think, Jamie Weinman had a quote from Hugh Wilson on his blog saying that I think Wilson just felt really overstretched at this point. He was kind of, even though he doesn't always have the writing credit, he was really managing the whole show and writing every word. And he felt, and maybe doing other shows, other projects, and he felt overworked. And he said that drama was just easier to write than comedy for a while for him.
I mean, I think that almost might be true in general. I mean, it's comedy is, especially when it comes to like scripted comedy that you have to produce on a weekly basis, like a sitcom. I mean, that's got to be exhausting work. I mean, it's the reason why all of our modern sitcoms have these huge writers' rooms now. Yeah. Where they've got 8, 10, 12 people throwing gags in, and, one writer ends up getting the credit usually, but it's a collaborative effort because it is so much work. And I don't know if drama is necessarily easier to write, but it's less intricate in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? When it comes to having really successful comedy, you've got to think about multiple things like timing, like staging, like directing. I mean, directing drama, I think you can trust the actors a little bit more. Directing comedy, there's going to have to be marks that you got to hit. And I think you're right. I think that if Hugh Wilson was feeling harried, honestly, sometimes when you're feeling harried, your mind ends up going to darker places. You end up going to, again,
our commitment
meta alert number 2.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you're stressed, your mind ends up going to darker places. And I think that you're right. I mean, we're going to see these are all interesting episodes coming up in the last half of the season, but there's not a lot of like fish story happy memories to take away from a lot of these.
Yeah, that's right. And I think they'll give us a ton of things to talk about.
Yeah.
But I do feel a little bit cursed by, our deep commitment to meta-ness, or the weird synchronicities that we always have between what's going on in the show and what's going on in the podcast and what's going on in our lives.
I can't believe they elected Arthur Carlson to city council. I mean, he just seems so completely just wrong for the job and unqualified. I don't know why they elected that guy.
Yeah, I don't know how we get through 4 to 8 years of just so long as he doesn't put Arthur Jr. in as city councilman for life. Without going into a ton of personal stuff, I have some sympathy for Hugh Wilson feeling overstretched and feeling a little down and maybe not feeling a ton of comedy in my bones these days. And I hope that it won't, that the podcast won't turn into a dreary trudge. I think it'll give us a lot to talk about, but that is going on. There's stuff going on in the world. There's stuff going on in our lives, and there's stuff going on in this sitcom that we love.
My name is Ned.
Hello, Ned.
It's been 4,000 days since my last drink. It was my first and last blackberry schnapps.
Ned, did you clip Ann Landers today?
Ann Landers is a boring old biddy.
Ned.
I was more animal than man.
So as I said at the beginning of this episode, at the beginning of Ask Jennifer, there's this discussion that Herb has about how advice columnists or advice radio hosts are becoming a huge hit out there in the radio marketplace. And so Herb, for once, is ahead of a trend and tries to cash in on it. And so this period, while I think more accurately, it's probably best to say that this period of the early 80s is the beginning of talk radio. There's obviously the long, long tradition of advice columnists in American newspapers.
Yes.
When you look when you look up the history of advice columnists, sometimes you go all the way back to the 18th century newspapers and those notes of the lovelorn that would appear sometimes in them, going all the way back to like the early 1800s and then the Victorian era. But our modern era of advice columnists in America, anyway, really started with the great rivalry of Dear Abby versus Ann Landers.
Yes. The one step along the way that I think of too is, did you ever read Miss Lonely Hearts, the novel?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so it's a classic novel by Nathaniel West from the 30s, I think. And it's this very, it's this very bleak novel about a newspaper advice columnist called Miss Lonely Hearts. He's a man, but they never tell you his real name in the novel. They just call him Miss Lonely Hearts. And, he gets involved with one of his readers and has an affair with her, and the husband kills him. And the whole thing is extremely depressing. It's all about sort of how in a modern age, there's no connection between people. And, it's a bleak, powerful, it seems modern, more modern than the 1930s in all the worst ways.
So this sort of, idea that middle America would go to these women in newspapers for advice on their personal lives. The one thing that sort of Ann Landers and Dear Abby, who by the way were twin sisters. I mean, there was an original Ann Landers who kind of handed the name off. They were the Pepsi and Coke of advice columnists throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. And so, one thing that we can say about these advice columnists is that even in these very conservative eras, they were always they were women's voices that were listening to women's voices.
Yes.
And it was all happening in the public sphere, which I think is something that's that's unique and very special about this as, sort of a part of major media. The newspaper in the 20th century was a very male place. All of our plucky girl reporter sort of tropes notwithstanding, hard news on page 1, sports on the back page. In the middle, you've got a lot of ads and a lot of classifieds. And then somewhere, maybe there'd be a fashion column or an advice column or a home economics column.
Life,
or something
they would call it.
Life, exactly. Yes, the purple section of USA Today, right? Like, this was a place that women were able to kind of carve out in the public sphere that was really important. And, again, we can talk about the vagaries of giving good advice versus bad advice like Jennifer has to deal with at the end of this episode. But I think just on a purely media level, it's an interesting time capsule. I mean, today, there are, I think starting with Gloria Steinem in the late 60s and even earlier than that, having Helen Gurley Brown, today we're used to women's media. We're used to sort of, magazines, websites, blogs that are dedicated to women's issues. But, back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, these were, I think, a little less prominent.
Yeah, sure. And just, back to our topic of emotional labor, like in a sense, what Ann Landers and Dear Abby were doing was, this kind of emotional labor in the public space, giving people advice. And you mentioned Gloria Steinem and kind of second wave feminism, the big, discovery or innovation or the thing that, second wave feminism insisted that the personal is political and that this emotional work, anytime you give someone, this is what Jennifer learns, anytime you give someone advice on their life, that is political.
Yeah.
And I don't even think it's a coincidence that, Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique, she comes to write the feminine mystique out of two things. One, on the one hand, she is a leftist labor organizer,
right.
Which she something which she sort of conceals from her autobiography in later years. And then on the other hand, she comes out of the world of women's magazines, right?
Yes.
And that there's a way in which the feminine mystique is just a slightly more woke version of the advice that she was writing and reading. And that there's this, she probably perceived it as a reaction against the relentlessly apolitical world of these magazines. But there's another way in which, that there's this long tradition of, I guess, women giving advice. Anytime, women give practical, sensible advice, especially to other women, that is that is inescapably political.
Given that they were in this sort of cosmopolitan world of the newspaper and dealing with a lot of different kinds of issues of people, if you look up some of Ann Landers' writings on, say, homosexuality in an era that it was very, very difficult to even speak about these issues publicly, she definitely has a mixed record on it. But I think the idea was that in giving her advice, she would always try to be kind of fair-minded when it came to issues that were a little bit on the edge of what society was able to accept at the time. There's a great quote. Let me just find it real quick because I found it really funny. Ann Landers' sister, Dear Abby, had a quote about, I believe there's a homosexual who moved across the street from me. What do I do to make sure that my neighborhood stays right and clean? And Dear Abby just gave like a little bit of advice and said, you should move. Just sort of these kind of like witty ways of like defusing bigotry and hatred and suspicion. I mean, their reputation that they had built over, decades and decades, allowed them to speak truth in a way that a lot of other people wouldn't be able to.
This country is in deep trouble, people. This country is rotten to the core, and somebody better do something about it. I want you to take your hand out of that bowl of Fritos, throw away your National Enquirer, and pick up the phone. Go ahead, pick it up, hold it up to your face, and dial 555-TALK. Open your mouth and tell me what we're going to do about the mess this country's in. Talk radio. It's the last neighborhood in town. People just don't talk to each other anymore. Let's go to the first caller. Night Talk, Agnes. Yeah.
I love Lucy. Now, why don't they make more of them?
Those shows are ancient, Agnes. Lucille Ball must be at least 105 years old. The rest of the cast is dead.
And sort of the other half of this is talk radio, which became a exceptionally successful and cheap format for a lot of the AM stations that had lost their rock and roll and popular music formats to the FM band.
Yeah, well, it's actually very plausible that in real life, WKRP would have become a talk station.
Yeah. Well, that's also a plot line in the fourth season.
In the fourth
season. All news, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's the same kind of, a lot of these news stations decided they couldn't do news 24 hours a day, so they would cut it up with political talk. And, out of this late 70s, early 80s period, you get big hosts that became huge multimedia stars in the 90s and beyond. Howard Stern, Rush Limbaugh. There's also the story of Alan Berg, whose story was dramatized in the film and play Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Who was assassinated in 1984 by white supremacists. This medium, this type of radio became incredibly powerful in, again, political activity. Mostly, we can say this, talk radio is predominantly a very conservative format.
Yeah, that's right. Gosh, talking about things going dark, thinking about the film Talk Radio, I guess it was a play by Eric Bogosian.
Yeah.
Then a movie by Oliver Stone, based roughly on the Alan Berg story. And again, you get the sense, I saw that movie as a teenager without any real experience of the real world of talk radio. I never really listened to it. It wasn't as big a thing in Canada at that point. And, it seemed very powerful, but also just kind of like hard to believe that this was a thing that existed, I was naively thought like that, this isn't real. There aren't people like that. But there's actually much like when things get dark in this episode of WKRP, there is this kind of, uncanny of, well, the radio and the telephone together. I guess the telephone is what makes the radio interactive. But, the kind of the voice in the dark, reaching out to this place that turns out to be a dark place. It reaches back to you. It makes me think of Play Misty for me and Les's Groupie.
Oh, sure.
And all the times in this show when, this is obviously just this is the way my mind goes. The telephone as uncanny is a thing that comes up again and again.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that in the 1950s and 60s, that proto-talk format was a lot of times expressly bohemian and leftist when you've got people like Gene Shepard and Bob Fass. Like, that format, I mean, these were people who called in late at night. They were all a little bit weird, right? They were all a little bit off. And like, back in the 60s, that was a super positive thing because people started thinking about, society in different ways. And then as the 70s and 80s go on, those callers become darker and weirder. I mean, Listen, I'm a huge fan of Coast to Coast with Art Bell, right?
Bell.
But I go back and listen to these episodes from the 90s, and there's all kinds of, like, I mean, I love UFOs and I love all that stuff, but back in the 90s, people were concerned about Clinton and Bosnia and, spinning out all of these, UN conspiracy theories and everything else. I mean, talk radio attracts a certain kind of person. And I think it is because of that anonymity that the phone offers and that sort of connection in the dark. People who sit a lot of time stewing about these, these paranoid political theories, they find an amplifier, a megaphone in that radio call-in.
This building is a Cincinnati landmark. You cannot tear down a landmark.
Amy's absolutely right. This building is a landmark.
Let's put together a campaign to save the Flim. Come on. We're a radio station, aren't we? Let's get the show on the road. More drinks, man.
Listen, Bailey, there's a lot of money at stake here. It's powerful people, it's big business. They don't look right.
I have big business for lunch.
Fine, I'm just saying you got to understand that those...
We need a plan. We need to organize.
Bailey's right.
Bailey is drunk.
So what? Listen, Travis, we got here a historical building of historical consequence, and I want you to know that I'm putting all of my weight behind the lady from Chicago.
Why, thank you, Mr. C.
Well, our next episode is I Am Woman. And the woman in question is none other than Bailey Quarters.
The lady from Chicago.
The lady from Chicago. That's delightful. This is a great Bailey episode. It's a great Bailey and Mr. Carlson episode. It's all about their relationship, which is really cool.
May I go out on a limb, Rob, and say I think this is the best Bailey episode?
I'd have to go back and do my go through my checklist, but this is a pretty great Bailey episode. You go, Bailey. In this episode, Bailey tries to save the Flim building. This is the building where the station is housed, is going to be torn down. And at first, everybody is on board. In particular, Mr. Carlson is on board. The two of them are trying together to save the Flim building. Wonderful scenes of them recording, trying to record editorials with Mr. Carlson.
Carlson editorial, take one.
I really like Cincinnati. It's been good to me.
Huh?
Yeah, but I feel I want to pay it back.
Well, you should. Carlson editorial, take two.
Should I go now?
But then Arthur learns that Arthur's mother tells him that he can build his dream building outside of town. Nice callback to, which episode was that? Oh, the ratings episode.
Yeah.
Nice callback to the Arthur Carlson building that he wants to build. So he withdraws his support, and then it plays out from there.
I want to talk about sort of how the whole team gets on board with this.
Yes.
And you know what it's from? It's from going out and having a drink with your coworkers.
Yeah.
I don't think we can understate enough the importance of that social dimension. We talked about it when it comes to like fraternal organizations. Let's get drunk and have ribs. Like, what starts that initial seedling of solidarity? It's going out and getting hammered. And I think we have to absolutely recognize that.
Yes, right. The power of the third space. They're not at work. They're not at home, and they're sure not on Facebook. They're in a third space. And what is that third space? It's not Snookies.
No, there's a bar in the Flim building. Maybe it's like a hotel, restaurant, bar, or something like that. But
We've never seen a bar in the Flim building before,
No.
but it is because everybody there, it's signaled that everybody there it works in the Flim building. They're all kind of commiserating because the building's going to be torn down.
It reminds me a lot of Zodiac, where all the reporters have a bar that they go to right across the street from the Chronicle. Like that kind of thing.
That kind of thing.
People used to have bars that they went to right across the street from where they work. It's one of those things again.
And we get to see drunk Bailey.
Drunk Bailey, what did Mandy say a few weeks ago? Like, this is me after 2 beers getting political. Like, that's exactly what happens here.
After 2 beers, Bailey gets political. That's right. Well, actually, she doesn't need 2 beers to get political. It's early in the episode, she says that she marched 20 miles for the ERA on the weekend. That's quite a march.
Yeah, it is. That's almost a marathon, and Herbos are $40 because it was a walkathon. Exactly. It's great. And the big guy only starts thinking about saving the Flim building when he starts thinking about the old burlesque he snook into when he was a kid.
That's right. Sheila Bombs Away Morgan did her famous B29
routine or whatever it was. Yeah. But
yeah.
I want to talk about that really quickly because one of the neighborhoods that got raised during the urban renewal of the 60s in Boston was Scully Square, the West End.
Yeah.
That was the burlesque district.
Oh.
Basically, every single one of those old theaters that had vaudeville and burlesque in it got knocked down to make way for the highways and City Hall Plaza and all the other parts of Boston. So it's very accurate that the big guy would have memories of 1940s and 50s burlesque when thinking about the Flynn building.
That's pretty good. And then, that scene builds wonderfully. Bailey's all drunk. She's drinking old fashions. What's in an old fashioned?
Oh God. I used to be a real mixologist and know all of these old timey, cocktails.
Anyway, it's just cool that Bailey drinks old fashions.
Yes, it is.
And she says, I eat big business for lunch, and she gets all worked up. And then, as she gets everyone, or almost everyone, we can talk about this, as she gets almost everyone worked up with her, they march out of the bar, and everybody shouts a slogan. Did you catch all the slogans, Mike?
Well, there's Tippecanoe and Tyler too is the one I remembered really clearly from
Andy has the one out of the history books. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Bailey says, "I am woman." Andy says Tippecanoe because they fit well with their characters.
Yes.
Andy says Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Les says loose lips sink ships. A bit of World War II era spy paranoia. Venus says we shall overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the classic civil rights slogan. Mr. Carlson says we have not yet begun to fight. And Jennifer says diamonds are a girl's best friend, which is not really a political slogan, and which then leaves the two cynics, the two people not worked up, and it's a funny set of bedfellows.
It is, isn't it?
Johnny and Herb are left behind.
Oh, well, wait a minute. Now, you're not going to go with them, are you?
Sure.
Why?
Herb. The intelligent man always fights for the lost cause, realizing all others are merely effects.
What?
E. Cummings.
Obviously, I'm the only one smart enough around here to sit tight.
We're going to talk a little bit about Johnny and how he interacts with Bailey, I think, a little later. But this scene is great because you're right. They're the last two people to not be excited about it. But Johnny is smart enough to be the guy who's not the last person in the bar and thus gets stuck with the bill. And this moment, this episode I remember really well from childhood. I don't know, maybe it was just on a lot, but I think also the plot of it is very easy even for a kid to follow. We're going to save a building, and this is how we're going to do it. But the reaction of the crowd and Frank Bonner again and his reaction to getting left with the check is just so perfect. It's one of the biggest laughs I've had since we've started watching WKRP again.
Oh, it's really good. Johnny quotes an E. Cummings poem. So Johnny, even though Johnny is cynical about politics, he then says the intelligent man always fights for the lost cause, and Herb is left all alone. He tries to tamper with the bill with a pencil, right? He tries to erase and change the bill.
Oh God, it's great. So what happens when they get back to the office? Everybody has a role, right? The DJs get on the air and talk about the Flynn building and its unique architecture. As you say, Bailey and the big guy try to cut some great editorial commentaries for the air. One thing I said, how the big guy is always kind of earnestly stumbling over the beginning of each of these spots, and he's like, I really love Cincinnati. I really love this building. Do you remember the Robert Altman series on HBO, Tanner 88?
Yeah, I know that I remember it existed.
Yeah, it was about a fictional Democratic candidate in 1988 running against Dukakis and Gary Hart and the rest of them that were running in 88. And the turning point of the series is when Tanner's daughter leaves a video camera underneath the glass table and tapes the senator kind of talking off the cuff about stuff. It's kind of like Bulworth before Bulworth, basically.
Okay, yeah.
And it becomes a huge viral hit, as something could become a viral hit in 1988. They make a commercial out of it. And this off-the-cuff sort of plain speaking ends up propelling Tanner almost to the candidacy. And so what I thought of is, why didn't Bailey just cut all of these really earnest things into an ad? It would have been fantastic. They could have even put in some Star Wars like sound effects like Johnny did.
I really love Cincinnati. They could put in the bit about Sheila bombs away Morgan.
I don't know if you remember, but I remember a time. Yeah, exactly.
But those scenes are really, really nice between Arthur and Bailey, and she is. At first, I wondered if Jan Smithers was corpsing. That she's kind of like, because her reaction each time he screws up is somewhere between being upset and laughing, and I think that's on purpose. But it's just delightful anyway.
It's like bemused indulgence. She's like, "Oh, I have to load some more tape now," but like, I just can't. I can't get mad at him. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Hey, Travis. Just went over to see Mother about the rents going up, and guess what? What? We're going to build my dream building. Lease cars, own property. That's what Mother always said, so we're going to go through with it. Take a look at this. The WKRP building. My dream come true. Hey, you know what this means, don't you, Les? What? That means you're going to have walls.
I get walls?
Oh, Venus! And Travis, you're going to have your own big private office with a record library. And in my private office, I've got a secret entrance there, see? And Venus, we got a room for you disc jockeys where you can just sit and do whatever disc jockeys do. And of course, Jennifer can have whatever she wants. It's my dream come true.
Mr. Carlson, are you excited?
Yes, baby.
Well, let's get going on editorial number 2. Come on.
So really, what happens in this episode, like you say, Rob, is that that gradually over time, solidarity starts to fall apart.
Solidarity.
Because everybody ends up finding out that if they move out of the Flynn building, they can get something they've always wanted. It starts with the big guy, like you said. He gets his office, he gets his think tank, he gets his escape route, he gets his secret room, he gets all of the stuff that he wants.
Yeah.
And has always wanted. Les, obviously, is going to fall by the wayside as soon as he can find out he can have walls.
He gets his walls.
Even the DJs and Jennifer have better facilities in this new suburban radio station building. And really, what this got me thinking of, I mean, Bailey has a motivation to do this for the right reasons, for saving the building, for saving the tenants and their ability to stay in the building, for saving the building for its architectural qualities. I mean, she is the activist. And she has all this solidarity at the beginning, but as people start kind of finding out that they can get something better for themselves, that solidarity starts falling apart.
Yeah, solidarity. It's a hard thing to keep people together. That's the challenge of political activism. And this episode ends up being, the stakes are very low, but it's kind of like a little parable about the life of the activist, right? I
mean, and that's the other thing, is that usually when it comes to activism, you don't get the boss and the worker on the same side. I mean, it can happen, and there are unique situations where it can happen, but this is unusual. And the fact that the big guy is the first person to break off, I think we should make note of it. I mean, he's management. He's going to get something better for himself out of this than the workers will. And so if you just deal with this from a very strictly sort of like labor union and labor policy kind of situation, this is as you say, it's a little mini version, it's a little parable of what's going on out in the culture at this time.
You have any idea how badly I want to know a woman with twin inboard engines?
I'm sorry.
It's okay, I had it coming. Anyway, somebody's got to play editorials when they're not supposed to. Dive in when they have no idea how deep the water is. Throw caution to the winds. Take command of a situation when they have no concept of what's going on. Nessman can't carry the whole load himself.
Thank you. I guess.
I just want to say, Bailey, that I admire you for what you did.
I think the other thing that we need to talk about is Johnny's cynicism.
Yeah.
Because, as you say, when they're at the bar, he's one of the last people to leave, and he doesn't really have the same sort of stick-to-itiveness. And it comes out in a couple of conversations with Bailey that his cynicism comes out of something happening to him, presumably in the 60s, that made him lose his political idealism.
Yeah, that's right. This is... I mean, I think it's all very true and believable what goes between them, but there's the generational gap between Johnny and Bailey is really obvious here, that he's just kind of like from a well-meaning place, but he's like saying, Bailey, you can't beat the system. And okay, sure, go ahead, get mad. Give yourself an ulcer. What's that going to achieve? That voice of like, the shrug, you can't, you what are you going to do? There's no progress without protest, but most protest doesn't lead to progress. Mm-hmm. So the natural state of affairs for the activist is to be disappointed. And, how you stay motivated over the long haul is a extremely powerful and potent political question. And once again, we are getting meta. But
well, I think if we're talking about generationality, I think we should make sure we note, like, Bailey gets Johnny out of the booth by luring him away with the idea that there's a caller that really wants to hook up with him. I mean, fantastic little callback to...
Oh, that's right. A woman with twin inboard engines and
on her
cut
boat.
Off jean shorts. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So apparently Bailey's been studying the kind of things that Johnny likes in a woman, but we'll leave that aside. So Bailey goes and plays one of the big guy's editorials without his permission and without Johnny's, knowing about it. And later on, Johnny says, well, one of us has to go and play, editorials when we're not supposed to. There's almost like there's an implicit passing of the torch in that Johnny's saying, I'm too old for this kind of thing anymore. It's up to you now. And so while Johnny's not activist and he's not actively involved in helping the Flim building, I mean, apart from the stuff he does for the station, he's noting the fact that it's the young people's turn now. And I think that when it comes to talking about the folks who were young in the 60s, when it comes to the 1980s, we see a lot of them losing their former activist fervor.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can't sustain that. And this would be a time when it would very much seem like a lot of the things you fought for were, for naught or didn't add up to much. And there is a...
I mean, it's not for nothing this episode, again, is being taped in early 1981.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bailey's political activism is being undermined and ridiculed kind of all the way through, not by the show itself. I think the show basically endorses her, but, the crap she's getting from Herb, man, how much do I love the part where in order to where she lights matches and throws them at Herb. Like that's sort of you saying this is the best Bailey episode. Like that might be the best scene. Bailey throwing lit matches at Herb so that his suit is going to go up in flames.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot take any chances with 100% polyester. You have to make sure you dodge those matches as best you possibly can.
But she's just so badass and cool there. Think about the little mousy, shy Bailey of season 1 and her throwing the matches.
This is for you, young lady. Sure, I like this building. Sure, I'd like to save it. But what about these, huh? What about these plans? What am I supposed to do for these? This Flim building is just another one of your causes, isn't it, huh? Come on, tell me the truth.
Yes.
Aha, you see? And just why should I put forth 1 ounce of effort? Just why in this world should I contribute anything to saving this heap of bricks?
Well, sir, Art Deco was just about the last architectural style in which humanistic design and fine craftsmanship were valuable considerations. After that came the glass and steel box. Originally, it was considered an art form, but it caught on mainly because it was cheaper to hang curtains of glass and have load-bearing walls. The machine was the metaphor for these constructions. The machine was in, people were out. Space became more important than the place. Singularity of design replaced variety, which of course is the very essence of life. Do you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Carlson?
Yeah. And I'm sorry I asked, baby.
But the Flim building, whatever, how important it is to save it, but it's just automatically lumped in. Everyone says, oh, it's just another one of your causes. Like she's just the kind of person who has a string of causes. The ERA is just one more of those kind of, liberal or radical, whatever, those pie in the sky causes that she has. Isn't there even a line doesn't Mr. Carlson say that he calls her father?
Yeah, that was another weird. See, I had some big guy trouble moments, problematic moments in this episode. And even with all of the big guy's recognition that Bailey's an important part of the station, that she's a great worker and she's got this ability to kind of go out and do things and be really effective, he still looks at her the way that season 1 big guy did, he lampshades it a little bit. I keep saying lampshade, but whatever. He kind of talks about it a little bit when he gets on the air and says, oh, Bailey's not a man. It took me a while to recognize that. She's a woman, and that was kind of his concession that, I recognize all the stuff Bailey's doing, but yeah, he calls her father? What is that all about? It's a very bizarre line.
Yeah. No, just the way that they're sort of infantilizing her, young lady. You know, he calls Jennifer young lady too, I guess. The big guy is showing his patriarchal ass in these pair of episodes. Let's be fair. We can idealize the big guy we want in his gentle, kind, you know, mainstream Protestant sort of Republican moral compass, but he is a product of his time and place as well. And in these pair of episodes, he's definitely showing it. That's right. He does come around. He comes around. Bailey has one more great scene where she, where she explains why it's worth saving the Flynn building and reveals this deep knowledge of architecture history, and that it's one of the last great Art Deco skyscrapers built in Cincinnati before the arrival of, you know, the sort of the glass and steel boxes of the modern age.
Yeah, exactly.
To put these two episodes together, you know, Les doesn't play a huge role in either of these episodes, but he has a bunch of, you know, laugh lines on the side that may or may not strike you as funny. In Ask Jennifer, we cut to him on the air, and he's just wrapping up something, smiling as he says, and blow the whole country, oil fields and all, right off the map. And then in case there was any doubt which country he's talking about, later in the episode he says, and we could take out Iraq too and say it was a typo. So, you know, so he's advocating that the United States, you know, bomb the hell out of both Iran and Iraq and take their oil.
Yeah.
That would never happen.
No, of course not. I mean, seriously, that's just pie in the skies type stuff. I mean, we've got our hands full elsewhere in the world at this point. So,
well, and then in this episode, he's cheerfully chatting about nuclear waste, right? That's his.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, he lists off Bailey's causes.
Yes.
And then says, I'm fascinated by nuclear waste. Did you know that we're producing, and, you know, he says, we're producing all this stuff and we have no idea how to contain it, and it's going to be deadly for 5,000 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think it's Venus who's sitting there getting alarmed as he, you know, sort of smiling, drops this science on him.
I guess what's interesting about Les is that we are seeing that he's this mad bomber paleo-conservative, but he does know the world around him. Even if he gets the words wrong sometimes and he gets the precise stuff wrong, it's that curiosity we were talking about during Venus and the Man. He's always curious to find out more, even if his mind kind of warps it in the process, essentially.
It's interesting how this episode is constructed and concludes. I guess it shows that, you know, the real stakes of the episode are Bailey's optimism and Bailey's relationship with everybody else, in particular her relationship with the big guy.
Yeah.
Which is why we see him and her, we see their rapprochement, we see them come back together, and he joins with her the fight to save the Flim, and we don't see the building get saved. I mean, we assume that it will. The show continues in the same sets for the rest of the season.
Yep.
But we don't see the victory. And that's interesting. I even think that there might be something, you know, sort of poignant or significant there about activism.
Well, it never really stops, does it? There's never really an end to, you know, any of the issues that, you know, either Bailey or any of us are involved with. I mean, it's a constant struggle, right? To see what's in front of your eyes. It's a constant struggle.
Right. And victories are, you know, they can be few and far between, and you have to be able to seize the moment, and you also have to play the long game. And that requires a lot of, you know, fortitude.
It does.
And it requires personal relationships. It requires, you know, people to connect. So all those things are going on in this episode.
Now I ask you, what do we do?
You speaking to me?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I guess we could promote the signing of petitions, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Trap. What else?
Well, I could begin to illuminate this issue in my news reports.
What else?
I'll give some of my editorials.
And I'll type those editorials.
Good time?
Uh-huh.
This is real estate mega bucks here. It's big business.
I'm not afraid of big business.
Boy, I am.
I say let's get on the stick. I say let's save this building right now. Come on, everybody up on their feet. I say we go back up to the office and...
Pass out.
No.
Let's hit it.
United we stand, divided we fall.
Yeah, Tippecanoe and Tyler, too.
I am woman.
We shall overcome.
Sink ships.
How about we have not yet begun to fight?
Diamond's our girl's best friend.
That's true. I mean, one of the things I think I came out of this episode for me. I mean, again, we were recording this after the election. Again, looking at the way things are right now in our lives, the stakes of a Art Deco building being saved in 1981 Cincinnati seem pitiably small. But I will say this much about the episode. Bailey's excitement, Bailey's optimism, Bailey's we could even go as far to say idealism, really got me pumped. I've been feeling a lot of despair the last few days, just because of the fact that resistance to what's happening is so scattered, and scattered, I think, a little bit by social media, but everybody's pulling in different directions, and
turning on one another. The knives are out. Yeah, I mean, solidarity. Boy, if there was ever a time we needed solidarity, like, if you're fighting fascists, you can afford to have a big tent, right? You can afford to
you can open up a big tent, and how many people decide to go in with you? That's the problem that I think we need to be worried about right now, because all of those never Trump, strong, moral Republican senators, I'm not seeing a whole lot of them speaking up right now. You know what I mean? I'm not seeing a lot of the people who could help build that big tent deciding to get into it. And, time will tell. I mean, this episode's going to go out in the middle of December. We could have had an electoral college thing happen. We could have any number of new scandals emerge. We could have the media just completely abdicate their responsibility like they have been the last few months. We could have any number of these things happen. Who knows what this is going to look like a month or so from now. But I think what I'm trying to say is that those of us who know what the stakes are really should be pulling all in the same direction. I don't think it should be that difficult to do.
No, I absolutely. I mean, well, okay, the Never Trump conservatives, I think we see, all through the election and now even more, this is a test to see whether they meant any of that or whether they just want to be on the winning side.
Yeah.
But those of us who are on the losing side, now is the time, for solidarity, and the kind of infighting that the left loves to do, fighting between the left and liberals, Bernie people, Hillary people. Is it about class? Is it about race? Is it about economics? Is it about identity? That's textbook divide and conquer bullshit, I think.
Absolutely. And we've seen it before in history. We've seen it before in multi-party democracies that have fallen to fascism.
Yeah, it's the oldest trick in the book. Absolutely. So it doesn't mean you have to wobble or waver on what you care about. But, we can afford, Churchill joined with Stalin to fight Hitler. We can afford a big tent. We can afford, if you want to wear a safety pin or not wear a safety pin, I don't know. I just feel like we got to all be pulling on the same side.
They built her back in 33 when the railroad man was king. Depression-bound folks came to town, forever wandering. There was depots by the dozen in the cities large and small. But God knows Union Terminal was the grandest of them all. Save the Union Terminal from the wrecking ball and chain. Life without them railroad blues would never be the same. Save the Union Terminal, save yourself a friend, so the mind's eye of your children can still see.
The plot of this episode actually kind of echoes a real life thing that happened in Cincinnati, which allows us to look at sort of the greater issues of urban renewal and the co-optation of urban renewal in the 1980s with the building of these big glass ice cube trays. I think that's
trays. That's a good phrase. Yeah. So you're going to have to tell me the story because I don't know it. You
didn't listen to the dashiki wearing Jerry Springer singing his "Save the Union Terminal" song a few weeks ago. We got it linked to us on Twitter. I mean, it's fantastic.
Man, that was cool.
So the Union Terminal was back in the sort of golden age of the train. It was, Cincinnati's central train terminal. And those of you who grew up in the 70s will recognize it. If you Google it, it is the Hall of Justice from Super Friends. They just decided it. Yeah. They just decided to use it as their model because it's a really cool looking Art Deco era building. You can picture it right now, right? It's got that sort of like wedding cake dome kind of thing with the columns in front and the nice reflecting pool. So back in the 70s, obviously the train was dying and Amtrak had taken over things and the Union Terminal was basically getting 2 trains a day essentially. And so there was no need to keep it up anymore. But those people in Cincinnati who recognized its unique architectural and artistic, there's a lot of 1930s WPA art that was inside there in the 70s, murals and such that could have been preserved. And so really what you've got here is another textbook example of this long forgotten era of Depression era art and architecture falling into disrepair in the 1970s. And local activist, I can't believe I'm using that word for him, Jerry Springer, sprung into action to help save the Union Terminal with a great, very catchy, and I say that with quotation marks up, song, Save the Union Terminal. Now, the building got saved, and it got saved a couple of different ways. It got saved in the late 70s by having it turned into a 1980s-style mall.
Okay.
That didn't last very long because it wasn't really centrally located, I think, for a lot of the shoppers. And so it was only a mall for about 4 years. It fell into disrepair again. But then in the 90s, there was another push to save the building. And so what happened was Jerry Springer came back to do more activism to try and save it. At this point, he was, I think, just starting to have his show appear in syndication. But he'd been in media for a long time since being mayor and city councilor. And they managed to save it again. And now it's a museum. And it shows off the unique architecture of the building.
Nice.
There's also other, businesses and offices that use it. But, here is an example of citizens standing up for something they believe in, able to save a unique piece of American history, just through grassroots activism. And, there are intersections there with business and the overall environment of what was going on in the 1980s when people wanted to develop. I think one of the things that we're going to have to keep an eye on, in these, the talk about infrastructure that's coming out of the president-elect is that we're going to have to all bone up on our eminent domain laws, because if we end up with a sort of 1980s-like series of buildings, of structures, both for infrastructure and for private business, which is probably where it's going to end up being built for, we have to be sure that we keep in mind that our architectural and social legacy might be under attack, basically.
Yeah. And, with all of the, as you say, the stakes of saving a building or not seem low compared to some of the scarier things that we're thinking about and worrying about right now. And yeah, I think, worry about human beings first.
Obviously.
But this is a theme of the podcast, right? Is it's public spaces matter and history matters, and those things are on the table here. Public spaces, that whatever that bar was at the bottom of the Flynn building,
it's much easier to turn that into something that can benefit only a few people rather than many. Exactly. And I think that you'll see that in sort of the idea that the person who was just elected president made his bones in the wild and woolly real estate market of 1980s Manhattan.
Yeah, that's right.
There you go. That was a time when, everything was up for grabs for the first time. The city was on its way out. It was, Ford to City, drop dead, the 1970s urban jungle of New York. And the idea that you could, in the 1980s, develop some of these, properties into something that could, again, benefit very few people. It happened again during the sort of Disneyfication of Times Square that we obviously have all decried as, good cosmopolitan liberals, but it's the same impulse. It's the broken windows policy type stuff that takes away common spaces from people and gives it over to the few. And I think that is something we are going to have to keep in mind as time goes on.
We're going to have a lot of tall, gold-plated infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. It'll all have someone's name on it, and it'll be huge.
I went to the public library to try to make sense out of all the madness. The place was boarded up, shut down, so I broke in and borrowed some newspapers.
I don't get it, Doc. How can all this be happening? It's like we're in hell or something.
No, it's Hill Valley, although I can't imagine hell being much worse. Obviously, the time continuum has been disrupted, creating this new temporal event sequence resulting in this alternate reality.
English, Doc.
Here. Let me illustrate. Imagine that this line represents time. Here's the present, 1985, the future, and the past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein, but reality for everyone else.
So hang in there, people. Stay woke. Take care of your friends and your family, and be like Bailey. Fight the power.
Be like Bailey. Tippecanoe and Tyler too.
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.